I'm very excited to welcome you all to this little launch of the anticipated Megatrends framework. I think people would just pop in as we're going along. This is kind of a new platform for most of you, I would expect. Butter is actually a Danish platform. But I'm very excited to have you here. This will be a little bit of an experiment for how to do collaborative foresight, because you're not just going to sit and listen for 1 hour. That's what I had together. So I'm just teasing a bit for what's to come. We're going to try out actually the exercise as part of the new Matrix report. So we have a lot on our plates. And I think I will start just introducing myself briefly and anticipate. So my name is Mathias Bjørnef, and I'm the founder and a futurist. I've been working with foresight for close to 8 years now. First at the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies, and since then, 2 years ago, launched Anticipate, which has been a great journey already so far, trying to build a platform for democratizing futures thinking as a strategic foresight consultancy. So we're trying to democratize futures thinking and foresight, trying to spread the word, create awareness, trying to build futures readiness in individuals as much as in organizations, and also create meaningful change. So trying to understand what change is happening and help our clients and our colleagues and our partners create better futures. So we do this through trainings and strategy and innovation processes and programs, as well as kind of facilitating futures thinking and bringing futures insights out of people through workshops and talks, and also trying a bit more immersive interventions. So the futures are very interesting per default, but I think it's important to try and really feel what could come down the line to act better in the future, right? We're based in Denmark, in Copenhagen, but trying to have a global outlook and a global network, and trying to be a platform for creating better futures for more people, essentially. And let me just quickly introduce what we're going to do today. So first, we'll have a bit of a check-in exercise, and then I'll go a bit behind the scenes. So why create another Megatrends framework? As some of you might be aware of, there are multiple out there, right? So why doing this? How it came about? How others work with Megatrends? How we've been working Megatrends with clients? A little tour of the Megatrends themselves. Of course, you can dive deep in the report itself. If you haven't read it, I'll send it out afterwards. And then we'll kind of move into working with the PRISM framework. So it's not Prism, but Prism. So having to refract basically the futures through the lens of a megatrend. So take a topic and take a megatrend and trying to understand what are the implications of this combination, right? And there are many different ways to combine and question things, but we have developed this framework to make it more tangible and make sure that you kind of get all around, and also maybe ask some of the questions that are more uncomfortable or more challenging to understand what it will mean. And then in the end, we'll have a little Q&A, short Q&A, and you're also welcome to send questions during. And a reflection, like one final reflection, because as people who are familiar with Anticipate knows, a core part of what we do is to make sure that foresight translates into action. So we want to make sure you leave with something tangible that you've identified yourself. But I think first, let me start with a little check-in exercise. So we'll have a flashcard pop up. And I'm very curious to hear if you can put in the chat, what's one signal of the future, one question that's been very much in your mind lately? I'm very curious to hear what's going on out there around the world. And great to meet people from all over. And important to this is that futures is as much about observation and it's about imagination, right? So we need to get a broad picture. So if you can just put in the chat, what's one thing that's been on your mind lately? I would love to hear that. Some interesting topics already being brought up. I think a lot of them it's slightly kind of covered in the megatrends and in the topic, and it's very present on people's minds, very curious. We'll do a little bit of voting exercise later. Well, we'll see what you find to be the most impactful megatrend. So let's see. Oh yeah, that's some good questions here also, how to make sure the critical thinking stays alive. I think I kind of came back from Future Days last week where I met, I think, some of you. I can recognize some names in the chat, and I think one of the things that I realized was that it's great to have collective visions, and we need to try to make sure it also transfers into the people who are not thinking about the future too much, right? Or thinking about the future in structured ways, because it is really a privilege to think about the future. But also something that a lot of people are not aware that it's possible to have more an anticipatory mindset rather than maybe being anxious about what's to come, right? Trying that. All right. Amazing. Feel free to keep writing your signals. I'll just, in the meantime, go a bit behind what the Megatrend framework really is about, right? So a brief insight into what's kind of the logic and research. And you might think, as I said already, why make another one? There are so many already. I can point to the first 5, right? And that's actually also how it started, because I thought, why should we start from scratch when there are already so many great Megatrend frameworks out there? As like a research question. So that's what we did to begin with. We tried to kind of distill some of the insights, some of the commonalities between the existing frameworks, and try to poke a bit and challenge a bit around what is missing from the conversation here that are pretty clear and obvious directions that we're seeing, right? And I think one thing when we talk about megatrends is to agree on what it is. And for us, it's the global forces that is changing the world at large. For other people, it might be more industry specific and so on. But this is really trying to create an overarching mindset. You might call it macro forces as well. That's what some people do. And everyone, that's the thing with megatrends. Everyone might be aware of them, but but often we have a hard time kind of making sense of all the complexity around us and getting an overview. So it's also a way to frame that complexity in a certain way. It's not to make it more simple or anything, but it's just to give a frame to it, a context. And I think one criticism that I have of existing megatrend framework is that for me it very much should indicate directionality. There should be direction in it. It's a movement. And I think not all megatrend frameworks are like that. It's more like a static state of being in society at the moment, right? So that's what we've been trying to do as well. If you notice that most or maybe liquid lifestyles is not one, but we've been trying to insert some kind of directionality. There's a movement. And I think essentially what I've been experiencing a lot since starting Anticipate 2 years ago again, and founding it, has been that I talk a lot about frameworks and about mindsets and ways of thinking and all that, because I'm a foresight nerd. I love talking about futures and foresight. I love the methodologies, the ways of thinking, even the philosophical aspects. But I think what I came to find more and more is that a lot of people need some kind of context. They need to see what's actually happening first before they can move into more maybe advanced form of futuring. So kind of it is also an effort to meet people where they are in a kind of an overwhelming world in many ways, and structure thinking just a bit in relation to kind of the forces that we can all see and we can all feel, as you're also putting in the chat here, right? There's a lot about geopolitics, a lot about trust and AI and so on. All these different concepts that can be difficult to understand and grasp, really. So if we talk about the very boring stuff behind the frameworks, like we tried to distill existing frameworks. We started 5 months ago. Try to frame it a bit, try to see are we covering every single corner, is anything missing? And you might argue there might be another megatrend that could have been added value. But let's try to balance it somewhat as much as you can, because these are very different topics, right? And themes. And then finally trying to decode it. So what do these megatrends mean? We've tried to come up with some implications, some analysis, and also some signals, either, of what's already happening, what we're seeing around us, or of potential future scenarios. If, trying to get that a bit outside of that, false sense of certainty that megatrends sometimes can bring, because there is a lot of uncertainty in the future. And then in terms of how people use this framework, so I think essentially it's just a really good bread and butter way to get started with futures and foresight. And what we offer, for example, are trainings on how to spot signals and how to analyze megatrends and so on, kind of bridging the futures with the present in a way, and making sure that you're kind of generating new knowledge in your organization, or with the people you work with, or a university degree, or what you're doing, right? It's always interesting to talk about futures, at least in my mind, but having kind of a framework to approach it can be helpful. So kind of a training would be like bridging knowledge creation with knowledge curation, because a lot of what futures is as well is communicating. It's sense making. It's spotting the patterns and making sure that they provide some sort of strategic insight at the end of the day. And then another part is that, for example, right now we're working on a project for the futures of impact investing, and you might think, oh, that's a complex topic, and it really is, but it's been a really good offset to start analyzing what kind of more specific trends is happening in this field. And when we talk about blended finance, or whether we talk about trade-offs and flows of capital, very high-level stuff, but really like getting a sense from the outside in what is happening on a global level. So what we've been interviewing experts on what the megatrends could mean and what things are happening in the context of impact investing, making sure that all bases are covered again. I think that's an important phrase that I'll keep coming back to. And then the final thing is to host a session on the PRISM framework that you will be shown a bit later. There's a little teaser in the report itself, but kind of making sure that there's an approachable way to go about analyzing the megatrends and how they could impact your organization or your context. Taking your team through this exercise, I think it could be very helpful. It doesn't have to be all the megatrends with every single topic you work with, but just starting having the conversations. I think it's a good way to be exploratory, but also guided in your journey to kind of frame and understand future changes. Good. So I guess some of you have come here to hear about the megatrends themselves, not me talking about what goes into it. So let me just take you briefly through the 8 megatrends. Is not going to be super comprehensive. Again, you can read about them in the report itself. This is more like an introduction or like a recap for those of you who haven't maybe read it recently. So very important up here is the quote that it's not really fleeting phenomenon. It's nothing that's just going away. It's not a fad. It's powerful long-term forces, and it's shaping industries, societies, and the world at large, and how they evolve. And then what I forgot to say in part about behind the framework was that, of course, we have our own biases. We come from the global north. We come from Denmark. We are certain types of people, right? So there are some limitations to this, and the Megatrend framework, fully global one, would be amazing to have. But of course, we can't look past all our biases, even though we're aware of them. So I hope you'll take this into consideration as you read it as well, and think how would you think about it in a different way if you came from a different place or different background? I think empathy is a key word here. And so the first megatrend, emerging world order, I think is also very present in people's minds, that I could see in the chat. What was happening? We have Donald Trump, kind of demolishing everything that's been built over the last many decades in terms of the existing global world order. We have ongoing disruptions, the new alliances, more regionalization in many ways, arguably. We're also seeing the rise of a splinternet. And yeah, as Johannes put, like multipolarization, I think that's a really interesting concept. Kind of like maybe it's already exists in the current system that we have. Maybe it's not even emerging. It's just what we're dealing with right now. But I still think there are some things that are not really in place, and maybe they will never be, right? So some of these things are on a technological basis, or trade flows are changing. We can see China, for example, having a huge part of global GDP and becoming the world's biggest economy very soon. We can also look into a scenario, as this scenario calls for, basically like a world held together by, some necessity and maybe mutual interests, but not necessarily like common values in many ways. So I think that's an interesting element to explore further. What does it take to collaborate in this day and age as an organization, or between different countries, where things are a bit more fragmented and difficult to keep tabs on? Yes. So also global alliances like NATO and OECD have become under pressure. We're seeing BRICS Plus, and what does it really mean that new powers are entering the fray? I think that's one of the questions I want to deal with for this one. Then we have urban transformation. I've been working quite a lot with urban futures personally. I think it's a super interesting topic, like kind of as the machinery of society in many ways, like the engines. What is a lot of what is happening around the rest of the world is impacted by what is happening in our cities, and most people live in cities and will continue to keep living in cities. That's at least the projections that I'm seeing. But it's also migration flows and trying to find new opportunity in many ways. As you can see, like 2.5 billion people more than today could live in cities compared to today. That's a lot of people, and they have to fit in somewhere, right? How do we create the infrastructure needed, and both societal one, social one, the buildings themselves in a world that's also facing climate change? I think there's also something to speak around, whole livability topic. What is a livable city and for whom? And could we make cities that are thought a bit from the ground up? Is very difficult because a lot of them exist already and have legacy infrastructures. But can we think about a city that flows in a different way? I think there are many great examples out there of like small neighborhoods or very like housing complexes that are trying new ways. And I think that what goes for everything that relates to futures, we need to experiment and try a way out of the problems that we are facing, right? And especially in the global south, this will of course be a huge topic. I think in the search for opportunity, many people move towards cities that are not necessarily always prepared for them. Then we have optimizing health, so a bit maybe more on a personal level rather than on a systemic and societal level. I think and this is maybe also a mega trend that goes a bit in different directions in terms of where we are and what we're facing. And in some places, it's still trying to feed yourself and very existential health threats like diseases and so on. We're seeing the dismantlement of the US aid right now. That's a sign of maybe what's to come, because they've been carrying out a lot of the needed assistance towards people in dire situations, right? But it's also about the search for longevity, that ambition that we, for some reason, always strive towards as humans. Want to live for as long as possible and as good lives as possible. I think that's equally important, right? And technology finally brings with it some opportunities, in a way that we can kind of personalize the medicine that we're ingesting, and the social aspects of our life as well. Mental health is also becoming more of a present topic, because we're realizing the body is not just an isolated system where one part works on its own, another one does, or even in terms of planetary health, how we live on a planet that also relates to our health. I think there are many different topics that could really be interesting to dive into here. And of course, health is a very complex issue because it's something very personal, but it's also something very systemic. So I think that's what's been really interesting in writing this megatrend. Like how can we pull the right dial the right numbers and pull the right triggers in terms of improving our health as a society. Good. So I think this is maybe, at least in the feedback we received, because we did go through several feedback rounds with people. Liquid lifestyles is a very hard one to kind of position, because it means a lot of different things for different people, different cultures especially. And I think that's also what we want to transmit or communicate with this megatrend, in the sense that there's a lot of things happening on a social level. Where do we belong to? Where do we feel belonging? What's our culture in a global world where we are very technology driven as well? And some people are resisting a change of norms, and that also has huge effect on society at large, right? We're seeing this polarization in some ways driven by social forces as well. And I think it's clear here is that there are numbers too. Even McKinsey says that diversity is good for society, right? I think that's something that we've come to find over and over again, that it's not good to be thinking the same ways necessarily always. We need to challenge each other, to have some friction in society as well. Maybe are not on the level we're seeing in many ways now, but also being able to live the life we want as a person, and having that as an ideal, right? And you're seeing the best moments of everyone else's life from around the world, and being inspired, but maybe also a bit, it can be a bit challenging that you're always seeing the best version of everyone, right? And you can strive towards that on your own, but sometimes society needs us to support you, right? And yeah, that's all collectivist issue. Who do I belong to, and where do I want to fit in? And do I want to fit in, or do I want to be my own person? I think something to be considerate about, especially for newer generations that are not, hit by the cynical side effects of being an adult, or that are seeing things can be different than what they used to be. Then we have blurring realities, and maybe this kind of leads into blurring realities, like the whole liquid lifestyle topic. But basically, that we're seeing both physical, digital realities kind of dissolving. We don't talk about what's online and what's offline too much anymore. There is a counter trend here that some people are actively seeking out nature, seeking out not being part of technology, not using technology in the same way, mindless way that many other people are. But also on a trust level side, in the truth, like what do we do with all this information we have at our disposal all of a sudden, right? It looked to be a huge opportunity for everyone to really get a sense of what's happening, what's going on in all places. You can actually, take a university degree online by not paying anything, just reading the right articles and so on. That's an amazing move, right? But it's also led to people, feeling a bit disenfranchised, or maybe seeking out their own reality in the matter of things that makes them less connected to other people. And that's that problem here, is we see like distrust, breach, polarization. So because we maybe don't see eye to eye, or we hear all these bad things about people that we don't relate with, or don't talk to, or don't try to understand, and we create more of a distrust in society. But there are also positive effects, of course, in the sense that everyone there are opportunities to make something of yourself. And we are seeing attempts to break some of these echo chambers, like seeking out a different opinion. I think it's become like kind of a counter trend to this whole reality we're facing. And then, of course, again, mentioned by many people, I think artificial revolution is everywhere at the moment, and it's difficult not to be caught on the hype train. But basically, that we're seeing it rewrite the rules of everything. Of copyright, I think that's one of the biggest ones. Of creativity. It's both democratizing creativity, because all of a sudden you have a sparring partner, or someone who can kind of create the artwork that you may envision, but don't have the talent to create yourself in a way. But also, what is it trained on? The algorithms and the LLMs that many people are using. And what kind of systems are we looking into? Are we giving away some of the control and some of the power for a promise of efficiency and productivity, and to what end, really? And of course, this is a huge topic, and there are many diverging opinions from when super intelligence will be here. For example, will we see like SGI or AGI, sorry, artificial general intelligence? At some point, we'll see consciousness, embodiment of AI in many ways, or we will see a huge backlash at some point. I haven't really seen it yet, right? But there are a lot of things going on in this sphere, and it's changing by the day, it seems. But this is where it's important to not really get caught up in the latest news or the newest model, but try to look at things on a more helicopter perspective, trying to look at things from a higher perspective, really. I think that's important. That's at least a word of caution from here, that also being intentional around how you use AI, for what purpose, to what ends. That's, at least for me, it's something where it's hard to, there's no takey backsies. So we have to really decide on what we want to use it for and which purposes. Then another one that I think has a lot of impact, and something that we are realizing, maybe a bit too slowly, but collapsing ecosystems, the whole climate crisis we're finding ourselves in. We're seeing the planetary boundaries being breached, but also I think it's not all doom and gloom. I also see a lot of potential breakthroughs that can help us reverse this crisis. It's maybe not on a transnational level, but more on a bottom-up movements, new solutions, a lot of energy and also capital being put into this, because it's actually affecting people on a very day-to-day basis now, right? So we need to focus on how we can overcome this challenge together, because we only have one planet, right? And I think one of the positive signs we've been seeing over the last decades have been the trend towards more renewable energy, not just because it's sustainable in that way, in the green environmental way, but also because it's more resilient as an infrastructure. We can generate it again. That's kind of in the word renewable, and they were able to have it in places where there's not necessarily energy sources. So I think one of the key shifts here is from extraction to engineered regeneration. We need to be very conscious and very focused over the next decades to make sure this doesn't end very badly. And there are already attempts. Like there's also biodiversity is a key theme here to really bring back nature into both our cities, but also to places where nature has been abandoned. And finally, and again, this is where I don't know how many of you thought of this before you read the report. I hope some of you did, but the whole inequality in society on a global scale, on a national scale, it starts and ends with wealth in many ways. Also social inequality, of course, but in reality, it's the lack of opportunity to be equal in society. Again, I come from Denmark, so this is something we have a lot of talks about and focus on. But even Denmark is the inequality in society is widening. It's creating really systemic vulnerabilities. So having top 1% controlling 50% of global wealth by 2035, I think is a completely crazy thought, right? That's not how things are used to. It should be in a way, and that's where my personal opinion. But you can also see the ramifications of it in a way that societies at the bottom of societies is really also, again, talking about vulnerability, it's not great for the wealthy to be super wealthy, because at some point, people are there's gonna be backlash and massive backlash against all this. I truly believe, and I think that might be the way to go. We need to change as a society. We need to find new ways of distributing wealth, of trying to bring everyone into a good way of living, good standard, right? We've been all if we look in past 200 years, we live better lives than we did back then, generally speaking. Of course, it's very big generalization, but that shouldn't mean that we should have an A team, and then we should have a C team, and then we should have everyone else stuck in W, right? So I think that's something to consider, and there are ways from the bottom up as well to kind of making sure that we create more resilient local economies. And I think the localization of many things is one of the key underlying drivers that we're seeing when it comes to futures. Trying to bring back some of the decision making on a more local community level, even though we live in a very globalized world, at least globally interdependent world. Anyways. Good. So that was a very, very quick run through of the megatrends. Again, as I said, more information in the report, and feel free to reach out. We'll have also room for a few questions afterwards. But I'm curious to hear from you, actually. So we developed this framework, get some feedback, did get inputs, and it's built up over time. But I'd love to hear, what do you find? Which megatrends do you find to be that you're most unsure about in terms of trajectory towards 2035? So if we do think that these are essentially some of the biggest global forces we're seeing, what are the megatrends you're most unsure about the trajectory of towards 2035? So I'm curious to see if what you will put in. You have 3 votes per person. It's not easy. And I don't expect it. Didn't expect it to be. But I'm very curious to see what you think. And afterwards, we'll talk about the biggest impact. So don't think about that for now. Just think about whether you're unsure about the trajectory of these megatrends. I'll just give you a timer as well, so you can see when you have to make your decision. Now you had a minute or something, so I'm going to give you 30 seconds to make the very, very tough call. Let me see. And I'm not going to vote on this because I don't want to skew the results in any way. And so I can also kind of fill a bit in on what I intend to do after the session. The idea is that this is kind of a collaborative foresight exercise. You've been lured into a collaborative foresight exercise. Welcome. The idea is to publish a little paper, a little briefing afterwards, with all your great input that will collectively, stand on, basically, right? Let me just stop the poll and see what people put. All right. So we have that's not super surprising, but that emerging world order came out on top. Artificial revolution, then collapsing ecosystems. I'm a bit curious that growing realities came forth. Actually, that's very interesting for me. Good. Let me just got feedback. Spotlight. There we go. And then now to biggest impact. What do you think will have the biggest impact? And now I'll put myself in spotlight mode. Didn't realize you were not able to see me. There we go. All right, I'll just take one more minute to fill this out. And as you can see, I reversed the order, so I'm trying to be a bit objective in that way. Yes, and as Ariadne writes, of course, it depends very much on where you live. That's right from your perspective, right? This is, of course, what happens, right? We have to make this assessment on a group level, and I think we're 50 people here. I think we'll come from all different places, right? So try to just bring your best perspective from where you're sitting. And that's what happens, if you go out and do these exercises yourself, you'll probably get a more contextually relevant answer, right? This is more of a little food for thought experiment. Let's see what you wrote. All right. The same three megatrends. So there seems like there's a lot of impact and a lot of uncertainty related to those, and I think it makes a lot of sense. I usually talk about how when people ask me what it is I do and what I focus on, I say AI, democracy and governance, and then sustainability, because that's basically it seems like the three biggest drivers at the moment, right? Of course, there are a lot of sub drivers, but super interesting to see this, and again, I'll share results afterwards as well. And wealth polarization, I think that's super interesting that came in forth. Let me speak about that. Good. So a little bit of context. Now we're basically moving into more interaction. So we thought, why create a Megatrends report just to state some descriptions or bring some implications that are on a high level, or we hope you could use it something. But in actuality, the most relevant thing is to understand how these Megatrends impact you and your organization, your context, right? That's really where the translation piece is what is the most important part here. It's sense making, because you can read passively and you can take it in, and you might learn a thing or two, hopefully, but really need to work with these on a more lasting level for them to make sense. So the idea with Prism as a tool is basically to refract the future. So what does refracting mean? So basically, light passing through a prism means that you see it in a different way when it comes out on the other side. It kind of bends. If you think of the Pink Floyd cover, I can't remember the album, sorry, but that's basically light passing through a prism. And that's what we do in Megatrends as well. We have a topic in the middle, and we have 8 different megatrends, and we're trying to understand how the megatrends impact the topic that you're working with. And I think for the ease of this exercise, we'll try to work with a topic that I think you all have a relationship with in one way or another. So we're going to try to look at the futures of work. So on work, you many things. It could be manual labor, it could be, white collar, blue collar, all the different colors. And it can be machine driven or human driven and so on. But that's basically what we'll try to look at here. The exercise is taking you through 5 different topics. Dark Side of the Moon, thank you, Johannes. That's what the Pink Floyd album is called. But basically the prism stands for possibilities, risks, inquiries, signals, and mindsets. So trying to give like a broad framing of what futures and what important things we need to understand when we work with futures. So we're trying to understand your topic through the lens of a megatrend, talking from these different prompts, basically. So what we'll do, we'll start with 1, so possibilities. So what new opportunities could, and I think from the consensus here, I think we'll work with artificial revolution. I think there's a lot of impact there, and there's a lot of uncertainty. So that's the megatrend we're going to work with. So I'm curious to hear what new opportunities could artificial revolution open up for how we work or who works in the future, right? So we're talking towards 2035. I'm curious to hear what you have. You don't have to, there is possibility to write 1,000 characters, just be brief and be quick, and feel free to come with a couple of suggestions. So you have 2 minutes, and the next one is going to be risks. So just stay with me, right? So possibilities, what possibilities does it open up for? Good. This is very much a crowdsourcing exercise. I hope you're okay with that. I thought it would be more fun than me showing you exactly what I think, because in reality, foresight should be and is collaborative in nature. So this is like that kind of exercise that we're trying to do here. And I think if you want, at the bottom, you can play a bit of music if that's what you vibe with. Feel free to do that. It'll only be on your end of the screen, so you can turn on or turn it up or turn it down if you want to. All right, and if you like one of the others, feel free to give them a vote, or just basically that's a thumbs up, right? To see if there's anything interesting here. A lot of good questions, like the number of hours we work. We've been working more or less the same hours in many countries as we did 40 years ago, which is astonishing considering what has happened since, right? Good. All right. I'll just people are still typing. Good. We have 5 different to go through, so this will just be quick. So I'm sorry if you're still typing, and feel free to put them in the chat afterwards. If you have any additional comments, and feel free to interact there as well. Good. Then we're looking into risks, right? So what might go wrong in relation to this megatrend? And who might be affected? I think that's interesting. Well, maybe we already touched upon this in possibilities. Possibilities is more about like some of the more positive outcomes. Some of the things that we could be happy to see from this, right? Just 1 minute. Oh, we have one here with 3 different roads: reducing originality of thought, reducing all people to quantifiable ROI. Yeah, that's pretty dark scenario. But let me just end here. So many interesting comments. I love this. And again, feel free to put it in the chat if you didn't have time, right? Next one. And this is maybe a bit, more direct possibilities and risks. Now we're looking into more inquiries. So think back to what we started. What kind of things are we not seeing clearly, or what is open-ended? What are we uncertain about here? Blind spots, questions. This is more like the chance to poke around on some of the things that that's very important when we do futures. It's like, what don't we understand? What do we need to get a better sense of? So think of this also as a little reminder of what futures can do. And I'll then again set the timer. There we go. Interesting, yeah. Definitely the whole point in ethics and in times of geopolitical tensions, what kind of different frameworks you're operating with, what is artificial intelligence? Intelligence kind of decided by our values in some sense of form, because intelligence is not just something that you can be completely objective about in a sense. I think that's interesting. And yeah, children growing up in a world where this is just the norm, that you can find places to look for answers in a very, very easy way. It's interesting. Okay. Let me see here. And that one. Yeah, the one question, like, I like the comment. We think we can still stop it. I think that's a super interesting observation. This is something that's out of our control already. In many ways, we don't know. Could we start with the positive, like the possibilities, because it does also offer some possibilities. So now I'm curious to hear, like, what kind of signals or small clues point to future shifts in the work through this megatrends? Like, any examples, organizations, models that kind of point towards this and new ways of working, basically. And as we say always, there are already pockets of the futures in the present. It doesn't have to be something that just happened. It can be like a longer term trajectory. So just put in the timer here. curious to see if you have any really good examples and can also be a counter trend to what you already been posting one of the other thoughts, right? Availability, that's really interesting. Who is it available for, in which context? Those are good ones here. Yeah, going back to more vocational work, what kind of skills are future-proof? I don't like that way of expressing things, but more will be better to have in the future, where AI might be more dominant, right? I think that's a key question here. Yeah. It's something very real LinkedIn post following the same formula, because it's like the standardization of content, of information, kind of the big like blurb, the 50 Shades of Grey, but not in the way that you would think of, but like the same kind of all way of doing things. Interesting. Thanks for sharing, Deborah, on how teaching university can have changed over time. And your kind of reaction to it, right? Because when it came about, it seemed like this huge shocker. So finally, I think we'll skip the next two. I'll just telling you what it is, but we'll just have this final one on mindsets, because we need to understand where we're coming from. What are we thinking of? What values or assumptions are we bringing into this? Are there anything we need to rethink? Some biases. What it look like from a different perspective? Anything? Any fallacy we're facing here? I think that's a takeaway. And yeah, just one more minute. Sorry, I have to be strict with the time, so we have a little bit of time at the end for questions or reflections. All right, the final one, just 15 more seconds to finish up, and we'll fill it out in the chat as well. We'll also go into the final briefing we'll do after the session. And yeah, just appreciate you all for playing along a bit. I think that's amazing that you're just open to spend just a bit of time reflecting as well, because I think that's important to take it in. Just end here. And just you feel free to type a bit more, but what the prison framework then will lead to would be have to have these different ideas of possibilities, of risks, of inquiries, signals, and mindsets that would then kind of like form the foundation for a further exploration. So the next thing we'll look into would be ripple effects. So what secondary effects? So if we try to stretch our thinking just a bit more, what are the things, and maybe in combination of two of the things we found, could lead to further things. So if you know the future's real, think about it that way, but basically what's rippling out from this and towards the future. And then also interconnection. So something I would love to have you go through would be to identify then the relationship with each megatrend. So now we've been looking at one megatrend and one topic, and in reality you could do this with any megatrend and any topic, but the fun thing and really interesting thing is also to combine megatrends. So artificial revolution plus wealth polarization plus work, that gives a whole new result, right? So kind of understanding what it means from that point of view. But yeah, thank you so much. Now we'll just we only have a few minutes left. I'm sorry, I was a bit ambitious with what I wanted to make during this time. So let's have a few questions, and then we'll end on a reflection from your end again. Let me just put this here. Good. Any sort of questions? Feel free to write them in the chat. I think there's been some already. I can just get started. Otherwise, I'll also appreciate you sending emails. I always say that at any single thing I do, and people rarely send anything, but please do feel free. My email is, I'll just put it in the chat actually, mbb@anticipate.dk. So you have direct access. And I do answer emails actually. Yeah, Deborah, that's a tough one. Is it of my own the own framework that we built? I think the blind spot. Like, what's the biggest blind spot I see? I'm being asked, and I think in general is always the being clouded by where you are from. I think this, maybe I don't even know what I don't know, right? That's kind of the thing about futures. It's difficult. Yeah, again, I speak from this context, and I think a lot of megatrend frameworks, most of them come from a global north or a Western context, and I think it's actually really interesting. Maybe we have this, and I'm very self-critical about this, but inner arrogance that we think we can point out all the global forces and how things work. But so I think the blind spot is ourselves in this kind of work. Hopefully, it's more, people see it more as inspiration, as provocation to think further, and not just as like a false sense of certainty or like a final result of how things are looking, like a prediction or anything. So Katarina asks, what kind of reliable sources do you usually look into while searching for signals? I'm a bit old school in some ways. I look for some of the, the biggest newspapers in the world, trying to understand, like The Guardian or New York Times or Danish. We have really good Danish news media called Zetland, which I love. They're establishing more around the world, but that, and then reports. My former colleagues at SIFS, they published this great magazine. I don't know if you can see it, but Foresight. I think that's good for spotting some signals as well, and just being observant, listening to people, hearing what they think, and being curious. I think open-minded. So the questions again, I'll send you the questions for the framework. Thank you, Humberto, for reminding me of this, to make sure that you have that if you're taking it back to your organization. And of course, you'll feel free to reach out if you need help facilitating anything around this. Yeah, so Nanon, I'm sorry for pronouncing your name wrong, maybe, ask if I'm using the tool just for gathering trends, making reports or presentations, also as a tool to work with clients. Basically what we mainly do is that we use it as a tool to work with clients. It's a really good internal, like, organizing tool as well, but it's really even better when you have people who are experts in their industry or their topic and really get to go into depth with this, right? So not just take 1 hour to talk about megatrend, but bring us in for like a half day, 1 day session on some of the most important megatrends. That's like a surface level thing, or more of a deeper investigation into what these could mean. So it's a bit both ends of the spectrum. Just a good way of, like, a good organizing principle. You can also use Steep or Pastel for organizing your thoughts, but I think this provides a bit more reflection, provocation. So Janet asks, do you have anything to share on this framework and the ripple effect? I'll share it afterwards. I'll share your input as well, and I'll share a bit more on the context of it. You can read it a little bit in the Megatrends report that I'll also share. Yes. Maybe a final question. So Nashi asked, where do we go from here to help teams imagine how they want to shape a strategy? So what's next? And I think Megatrends is just a start. You can provide some insights, but what we really need to do is to follow what we call the ACT foresight framework. So anticipate futures. Megatrends is a great tool for doing that, anticipating what could happen, creating something tangible. So using the insights that we gather from this exercise, providing input into, it's different scenarios. It could be, we could lead into different scenarios, combining different megatrends. It could also just be an exercise where we try to craft some of the futures very simply, and then feeding off strategy from that. But yeah, it's never really the final point up to strategy. There are always steps afterwards that are helpful. Good. And yeah, I hope that answered your question somewhat. It's a bit more complex. Strategy is always complex, but basically strategy is about making choices, and I think this helps you make more informed choices. So Patrick asks, there are different approaches to describing the future subtrends, megatrends, and transformations, and where do your megatrends start, and what temporal and social frameworks do they consider? And I think that's a very complex question. I am not an academic by nature. I have a master's degree, but that's about it. And I think this is framework. We make up these frameworks ourselves to contextualize change. I think a trend is something that is basically there's already been a trajectory in one direction, but we frame it, right? So what I call collapsing ecosystems, another person might call climate change, or a third person might, not think it relevant at all, right? If you're a climate skeptic. So it's really about making sense of things. And I think that's maybe what I'll encourage you to do leading up maybe to the final reflection now, is to think about what would you do if you had to come up with these megatrends. What kind of things would you leave in and leave out? Because there are stories we tell, and as always with the futures, we can never really be sure what's going to happen, right? So I think that's what I will leave you with. And then just a little quick reflection exercise to end things up with. Because there's nothing, better than just reflecting on what we've been through and what we have learned. So I'm encouraging you to just write. It can be for yourself, it can be in the chat. What are you bringing with you from this session? I hope you're bringing something. At least you spent an hour here, so I hope you didn't feel like it was a waste of time. Yeah, I already shared a lot of my reflections, so would love to hear yours. And feel free to reach out, ask questions. Again, I'll send out a lot of information in the coming days that I hope you'll find insightful as well. Yeah, so thank you so much for joining the session. Feel free to type in the chat. I'll just leave it open for a couple of minutes. Again, I wrote my email in the chat. You might have to scroll a bit up to find it, but I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you'll find the Megatrends framework interesting and maybe explore futures even further.